I'm still on Baudrillard in the order of simulations. One of the things he says in this book, Simulacra and Simulations, quite early on, is he draws a distinction between simulation and simulacra, as he's talking about it, and just faking or pretending. And the example he gives, which I think is really clear, I'm so glad I read this, is to do with illness. He said it's very easy to fake an illness. You just stay in bed, and tell people you feel ill, you ring in sick, you don't go into work that day, you tell your mum you got a headache, whatever it is, and that's faking an illness. He says that's different to simulating an illness. To simulate an illness, you would have to reproduce the symptoms. You would reproduce the symptoms of the illness. So some of those things still might happen. You still might ring in sick, and you still might tell your mum you got a headache and can't go to school today. But clearly what you're doing is very different, and that's the distinction he draws, and it's one I think is really clear. And it's one I can relate to from my own experience, actually, because when I was a kid, I didn't really like going to school much when I was a kid. I guess I wasn't alone in that. And quite often I'd tell my mum I felt sick and didn't want to go in. I'd had a cold, or I had a headache, or whatever. And my poor old mum, she was under a lot of stress. She had 3 kids, and she brought us up on her own with very little money. Sometimes she would be so stressed she had to go to work herself, so she would just say, "Okay, Fred, I'll have the day in bed." And of course, as soon as she was gone, I'd be up and about and playing. But that was clearly faking. There's no doubt about it. I didn't feel ill. I just said the words that you need to say in order to signify that you were ill and you wanted a day off school. But sometimes the second one I would do, and it wasn't just me, this is a bunch of us used to do this at school sometimes, is that somebody told us that if you ate match heads, little red chemical on the top of match heads, if you ate a bunch of those, it would make you feel ill for a couple of hours, and then you'd be fine. And so sometimes I would do that. I'd eat half a box of matches, just chew the red phosphorus off the end, and it would make you feel really ill. You get a very high temperature, you'd be sweating, you go bright red, shaky for about 2 hours, and then it would get a bit better and you'd be alright by the afternoon. So sometimes I would do that, and I didn't really need to say anything in that case. I didn't need to say, "Oh, Mum, I don't feel well." It's patently obvious, and that's obviously a simulation rather than simple faking. Very different experience. The third thing, I'm not sure this is a difference or not actually, the third experience, I don't know if this fits into the schema, but the third experience I had was that sometimes I would not want to go to school. I didn't take any match heads, but I would just kind of think myself into an illness. Just tell myself, "Oh, I don't feel well, oh, I don't feel well." Say that to my mum a few times. And after half an hour of that, the act had kind of become real. So, go on, pups, let's go on. And I would feel completely ill. So I'm just thinking, does that work in terms of Baudrillard's order of simulation? I mean, certainly, as I say, faking it is not the same as simulation in Baudrillard's sense. Morning. So it wasn't quite the same, but the last one, I'm just wondering what that is. Does that, where you kind of think yourself into a state of illness, does that mask the presence of an illness, or does it mask the absence of an illness? Hey, come on, you! Oh, God. I don't know is the answer to that question, I guess. I'm not sure it fits into that schema at all, actually.